Welcome. Good evening and welcome to this meeting of the Housing and Communities Select Committee. I am Councillor Claire Simmons, Chair of the committee, and I will be chairing tonight's meeting. Due to technical issues, this meeting is not being streamed live on YouTube. However, a recording of the meeting will be uploaded tomorrow, and members of the public and media are welcome to watch the meeting and listen to the discussions that take place this evening. Now, I'd like to welcome everyone in Committee Room 1 at Kensington Town Hall and everyone watching in the future on YouTube. Before we proceed with the meeting, I'd like to ask members of the committee to please make sure your mobile phones are on silent or switched off and laptops on mute. And we will start with 72 seconds of silence to remember those who lost their lives in the Grenfell tragedy. Thank you. So moving on then to the agenda. We start with the apologies for absence. Now, apologies have been received from Councillor Tahaba Issei and Councillor Linda Wade. Declarations of interest. Does any member have an interest to declare? No. So then we move to A3, the minutes of previous meetings held on 13th of May 24 and the 24th of May 24. The action tracker and the minutes of the previous meetings have been circulated. Does the committee agree to sign them as a correct record? I sign them now or later? So then item A4 on the agenda, which is leasehold major works charges. This report describes the process of capital works being carried out to the council dwellings managed by housing management, leading up to the point at which major works invoices are raised for leaseholders. We have some residents, I think, in attendance tonight, and I would like to invite those present to share their experiences or the concerns with the committee before we ask questions from the officers. For any residents not able to be here tonight and who will be watching online, I invite you to share your thoughts by email to scrutiny@rbkc.gov.uk. Would any residents like to come and share their experience or concerns? Please.
My name is Joanna Hamilton. I'm a resident leaseholder at Tor Gardens Estate. And I have yet to experience capital works, major works on my estate under the present previously that did with the town management organisation. And just to be clear, I'm a resident leaseholder on one property. Just really from what I've heard from my attendance at Leaseholder Forum, Homeowners Forum over the last 7 years, 6 to 7 years. I think particular issues, obviously, regarding communication, Perhaps if I can put it from the point of view of somebody who will be experiencing and dealing with capital works in the forthcoming year. Concerns over, as I say, communication at the initial stages and during the process. I think I have heard expressed and anticipate concerns myself over the behaviour of contractors. I think particularly where there are several subcontractors involved who may not be well supervised. And I think where there are attendant structures needed, for example, scaffolding. And it's been my understanding that scaffolding has not always had the security that it should have where it's used, and has been up for much longer than is necessary for the project work to be done. I think there has been a concern expressed over many, many years, and a concern of all those involved with capital works currently, of the checking and signing off of the work by people who are really spending money on our behalf, i.e. not the contractors. Very well aware that over the years it's been mentioned that there is a shortage of surveyors, clerk of works, and people who would be able to have the expertise really to check that the work has been done adequately. Another concern has been that many have expressed concern over works that within the 12-month period following the completion of the contract, works that are found to be inadequate or have caused collateral damage. These have not been addressed within the period by the contractors, and additional expenses have been incurred for leaseholders and others. Another thing that perhaps more recently concerns me is that where there is a consultation process and statutory consultation process, and where tenders are being sought, I'm just trying to understand the relationship between the various long-term contracts that have been implemented with various contractors over the years, and the reality of obligations to those people, and where the best deal or the best contractor can be found for a particular job within that framework. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And yeah, thank you for taking the time to come and share. Before you go, do any members of the committee, would you like to ask for any further detail on what we've heard tonight? Yes, Johanna.
Can I just ask on that last point? Are you talking about, for example, maintenance contracts, and if there's a framework contract for a maintenance agreement?
I'm not entirely sure, to be honest, because I think it's been quite hard to figure out what of the various lots that have been given out as longer term contracts actually relate to.
And that comes under your normal service charge, does it? You would. So those ones that aren't very clear are under the service charge, as opposed to.
I'm not sure about that, but I mean potentially if the work is less than the £250 that we are formally consulted over.
And in terms of the security on the scaffolding, is that alarms or lack of basically pulling up the ladder as people leave?
From what I've heard, I think there's a variety of detail. I haven't recorded it. It's what I've picked up over the years from various meetings. I think it may be failure of alarms, as well as the state that the that the scaffolding is left.
I know it's a very common problem
Yeah.
across the whole of the yes.
Yes.
Thank you. Also, in relation to the points that you've raised, quite a few of these are addressed within the paper. So it's very helpful to the committee, I think, to hear directly from a resident on exactly that subject matter. And we have noted particular concerns you brought to our attention around communication. The behaviour of the contractors, I think, is a useful one for us to note. And the defects liability period being used correctly, that we don't incur additional expense for leaseholders is an important one as well. So
yes, I'm just going to say, I think this presents an ideal scenario, which isn't always
it doesn't always happen.
Thank you. Yes.
Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you.
So yes, thank you very much for your contribution. And do we have another resident?
Yes, please, thank you. Right, I hope I can articulate well enough. I'm Caroline Charles from Hortensia House, and I have just received my major works final invoice. I suppose the whole experience was quite an experience on itself, because we had works for over a year. The final invoice was higher than I was expecting, so it was around 26,000. I didn't have a problem with the contractors. They communicated very well with me. I don't know whether because I'm on these committees that may have been the case. The one problem I did find was that during the 12-month snagging period, we had some issues with the new drainage that they put in, so the guttering, which was replaced, but not as part of the snagging. So it wasn't done by the contractors and was done as a repair. So I don't know how I will be charged for that. I mean, I've been in contact with leaseholder services, and they said that I shouldn't be paid twice, or I shouldn't be paying twice. But my issue is, why was it done as a repair and not done with the contractors? So that was my major experience. And as a result of that, I had some water ingress in 3 of the rooms that has been ongoing now since November.
And has the water ingress been sold?
Not
What today?
I'm still waiting for the surveyor's report in his defence.
Right.
He only came round on Wednesday last week, so I'm still waiting for that report. And obviously today's meeting was before. Of course. But he came round and measured the damp, and it's still quite high, so it hasn't dried out at all since the flooding that we had, and that was a result of the guttering, the new guttering.
The replacement guttering.
We had all new guttering put in when the major works was done, and it was faulty, so they replaced all the new guttering with new guttering.
And the leak is
I'm still waiting to know why the walls are still wet, because they were supposed to do pointing, everything. You know, I never had this problem before, only since the major works, since they've taken the old guttering down. Anyway, I'm just wanting you to know that my main issue was, why wasn't it done by the contractors that did the initial works?
That's a very good question, and I wonder whether we might be able to get an answer tonight from the officers, or in due course, we can look into that. Do any other members of the committee wish to ask for any further detail or ask any questions for the residents?
Would you mind, 26,000 is quite a large, you may prefer not to talk about this in
That's
public.
fine, it's fine.
Are you looking at a payment option with that, and how have you found the council's responsiveness on that?
There are lots of caveats with the repayment. If you do it on a 5-year interest free, you have to pay £240 a year. on top of that, there may be another charge, I'm not sure. In the defence, I'm waiting for people to come back to me with the answers. But it doesn't feel completely interest-free if you have to pay all these other charges. I have a meeting with my financial advisor, so I may pay them. I may pay it off and get the discount.
Can I ask a question about that? You say it was higher than you expected. Was it a lot higher? Or
It was 3,000 or 4,000 higher than I was expecting. I have asked leaseholder services for some breakdowns, so that may help.
that means quite significant? It's a lot of money.
Again,
In the process, did you provide any feedback in the contractual process when you got the section 20 notice and you put an eye? And did you feel subsequently you had on?
that's not really. I mean, I wouldn't know what to feedback, to be honest. I mean, there's so many contractors out there. I wouldn't know who were best and who weren't. And so I don't think it would have helped if I'd contributed to it.
So if there are no other questions, then I would just say thank you very much. Thank you, Connie. Thank you for sharing that information with the community. First of all, welcome to the residents who have just arrived. We are looking at agenda item A4, which is leasehold major works charges. Would any resident like to address the committee on this item? So in which case, we will move on then to the paper itself. Yana Dupree's head of home ownership and James Heritage, head of capital delivery, to introduce the report. Welcome.
Good evening. Yes, good evening. The report is essentially about how it works if you're a leaseholder. So the type of consultation we have to do on a statutory basis, but also on an informal basis. And then it leads into how we procure contracts and how that process works on site with the contact on site, and then which James is more able to speak to. And then leading to the final account, the calculations we do for leaseholders to work out their contributions, and then the billing that we do and the payment options available at the point of billing. I don't know if you need more information, but that's essentially what the report's about.
Thank you very much. So I will turn to committee, and I will start with Councillor Dorian. Do you have any questions or comments on the paper?
I actually wanted to touch on some of the points raised by the resident earlier, if that's okay. But in terms of contractor behaviour and standards, now obviously contracting is a tricky one, as the building industry by very nature is just not the way by virtue of the way it works. You often have these long chains of contractors and subcontractors, and I think it would be in practice very difficult for us to try and force who actually will be working on sites at a given time. I think we'll have to accept that. However, my question is around monitoring what's happening. And I know there's some information in the paper, but I wonder if you could go into a bit more detail about how we monitor how well the formal council contractor is actually doing, what standards we ask them to enforce in the contract, whether it's what codes of conduct or whatever else. And then the other angle is around maintaining standards, and the question then would be how can residents actually report issues? Because the complaint may be about an individual subcontractor, for example, the council will have no idea who that person is, But ultimately, there is somebody ultimately accountable. Is there a clear link between council officers, a clear named project manager on our side, who knows how they can escalate those sorts of concerns and make sure they're actually addressed? I think that's two questions. If I may, I'll do my last one as well. If there is something that's substandard, how do we enforce against that to make sure that they actually return and complete it? Because that's something that sometimes, again, anecdotal experiences, seems that doesn't always happen. Thank you.
Thank you. I think I could answer all those three there. So we've got three. We have the contractor expectations on how they interact with the residents, with staff, and how they deliver the works. How we report on issues, or how residents can report on issues as and when they may be identified, including escalation, and then how we enforce substandard work. So with the first one, I think you're right that the issues you pointed out at the start is an ever-present issue that we have to be vigilant on. I see it that the first time we have an opportunity for a contractor to express how they intend on interacting with residents and delivering the works comes through their quality submission for any given tender. There's questions relating to resident engagement and delivery of the work, so they have to commit or say how they're going to approach that. And I do appreciate that that's on a piece of paper, which differs very much on who's on site. But that's the first time the contracting organisation has the opportunity to say what they're going to offer us. We assess that as part of the project team, as part of their tender return, and they're scored on that. So for me, that's the starting point. Any commitment in there does feature part of any subsequently awarded contract that we need to hold them accountable to. If they're successful, they're procured and they're due to start on site, we do have our pre-start meetings with contractors. That's the first time the project team meets with the assigned project team from the contracting firm. And that's where we verbally, which is then later recorded in minutes, enforce our standards for what we expect on how they approach the given works. That includes any subcontractors that they bring in, any directly employed staff for the contracting firm. But that's where our project manager, our liaison officer, delivery managers, we tell the contractors what we expect from them when they go to site.
But is that written down somewhere? Is it part of the...
So we have our pre-start meeting, which in a situation like this, where we bring in all the stakeholders from the contracting firm, we will run through what our expectations are in terms of how they communicate with residents. That is then recorded as part of the pre-start meeting minutes. And we need to refer to that as the starting point, that they're made aware of how we've expressed our standards to them.
But there's nothing that they've signed to say they will meet set standards. It's something that we discussed, which is fair.
Sure.
But there's nothing they've actually agreed to contractually.
There's also the code of conduct that the staff as officers of the council adhere to. And that's what we try to convey through to contractors. But I think your point's noted about them signing a declaration effectively of what they agree to proceed with. And I think that's a fair point that I need to reflect on. Okay. It then continues when we're on site monitoring what they're doing. And I think we have to be responsive to any complaints or any concerns that are raised by residents. This does happen where a scaffolder might be erecting a scaffold outside a window of someone living in a property using, inappropriate language, being loud or generally just being disruptive. That does happen. And we do take those reports very seriously and raise it with the site team to make sure that it's considered and reduced, and then inappropriate behaviour completely omitted, because it is an issue that does get reported quite a lot.
Is it obvious for residents how to do that?
Yeah, so the benefit of a lot of these projects, which have, let's say, on average, maybe 14 to 16 months of pre-construction consultation and development before, or when a scheme starts to when a scheme commences to when it starts on site, the project manager, resident liaison officer from the capital delivery team, I think form generally quite strong relationships with the residents. So you know who the project manager is, you know who the resident liaison officer is. And that's also contained in letters that are issued to residents at different stages of the project. So you know who the assigned delivery officer is, if I'm trying to say. And that has to be seen throughout the project. And I think that the point we mentioned at the start is to reflect on. In terms of reporting issues and knowing how to escalate it, I think the assigned officers within the capital delivery team are well known from the residents. We look to ensure that any communication that goes out will have the named officers of who's delivering that project. So you have a contact name, email, and phone number.
And the final question on enforcement.
So in terms of substandard work, so each of the major work schemes that we're discussing will have an appointed contract administrator, who's appointed under the JCT term of contract to administer the contract, including the specification and materials that they're tendered for. We have a materials and workmanship document that sets the standard for what we require the contractors to deliver. We also have a clerk of works appointed for each major work scheme that's independent from the contractor and the project team, and they're responsible for monitoring quality. And then throughout the project, there's progressive reviews, sign-offs, monitoring of the works that does culminate in the end of the project where, in theory, practical completion could be issued.
Very much. Councillor Rossi, do you have any questions?
Yes, if I could just ask about the charging, because it does strike me, I know there are various options, but maybe some leaseholders might not anticipate at all how much they would be asked to pay. So if suddenly you're saying this is going to cost you 20 grand, for example, some people might be horrified and not be able to get their hands on a sum of money like that. And so the two parts of the question really, firstly, how do you communicate to people when you're setting out doing major works that this might actually be quite steep, the amount that they would be expected to pay? And then the other thing is, I know you do it over 20 years, but there is interest and then it gets charged for property, and, to be paying off a debt for 20 years, to me, would be something I wouldn't want to do. So, yeah, I just wondered how you manage the issue around the payment. And, I can quite see that some people would not be expecting to have to pay that much money.
I think it's fair to say if you buy a home, nobody expects a massive major works bill to ever arrive. I think it is most leaseholders, that would be a surprise, that that's one of the obligations that comes with leasehold ownership. But how it works is that we have to send a Section 20 notice. So that's a notice that's set out by legislation to all leaseholders before we enter into a contract. So there's two stages to it, but the second stage is the stage where we have to tell leaseholders what their individual contributions would be. So if it's going to be £20,000, you'll know it in that notice. It will say your estimated contribution towards this work will be £20,000. That usually takes about a year from between that notice and the completion of the work. So that the bill will only arrive about a year later. So, but depending on the level of bills, there's a lot more consultation that happens. It's not only a letter that's been thrown through a letterbox. There's lots of meetings happening on site, and then leaseholders will specifically be able to ask questions about it and what works is included and how it's costed up, and breakdowns are provided. So there's a lot of consultation that happens a long time before the bill arrives and then throughout the process. So before the bill arrives, about 3 weeks before, we send a letter to the leaseholder again to warn them that the bill will be arriving in about 3 weeks' time. And if they want to discuss anything with the income officers, they are welcome to do so. We would always encourage leaseholders to speak to the officers. They are trained to deal with financial matters, and they always seem to find a suitable solution in payment for all leaseholders. The payment terms are long, but it is dependent on the value of the invoice. So 20 years has specifically been set up to assist leaseholders who get bills of £80,000 to £100,000. That's an extortionate of money to pay as a leaseholder. That's why we have a 20-year payment option. So it's not for everybody, but it tries to assist people as much as humanly possible. There are the shorter payment options. Obviously, about 5 years seems to be our most popular option, but there are 10-year options as well. It's a long period of time, and I get that, but it is to make the bill as affordable as possible.
And can I ask a further question about responsibility? I mean, I've lived in a house where we were paying catch up the whole time because things had not been done. Everybody knows if you leave things, I mean, where I am at the moment, nothing is being done. So one of these days I will get a massive bill. But I know that, so, you know, if we, as, freeholder, I mean, to what extent do you say, well, freeholders should have mended that roof 10 years ago, and now the bill is much bigger than it would have been if we'd done it in a timely fashion? So, I mean, is there any sense that as freeholders, we take some responsibility for being slow in doing repairs or upgrading or anything?
So I guess the council is just about to commence under a new stock condition survey to profile the borough's homes and form a longer term plan for investment. The last one was completed in 2018, and that's what's guided a lot of the works that we're being delivering at the moment. And I think as the teams approach each of those schemes, they try to apply and do what the most reasonable amount of work is to make sure the building's safe and secure. I think there are instances where there has been larger gaps in a major work scheme that has resulted in works required. But I don't think it's possible to say just because work hasn't been done for a period, an extreme amount of work is required now, and maybe that it's deteriorated over a longer period of time. And I guess we're just trying to make sense on a case-by-case basis of what the most suitable works are.
I think I'm also right in saying, these guys will correct me if I'm framing this wrong, that the council does not have a great deal of discretion in kind of determining kind of when or how to kind of write off any elements of these. I mean, there's quite strict statutory framework for the way that we pass costs on, including, I think, some cases where we're not allowed to pass costs on. But and I guess the other thing then just to remember is that to the extent that the council ever would, if you like, kind of subsidise or write off, it's rent payers' money it's doing that with. And that's money which we can't then spend on investing in other stock, if you see what I mean. Yeah. So it all has to be contained in the end of the housing revenue account, and we're operating within a fairly tight statutory framework.
Sure. That's a good one.
Can I just make a comment on that actually, Councillor Rossi? If you look at 1.1, we're talking about a large scale investment in the council's stock. And I think we have a decision by the leadership team in 2019 on the capital works programme. It does say at 5.5. My mistake is 5.10. It is the landlord's responsibility to keep the buildings in good repair and condition. So I would wonder what recourse do residents have, leaseholders in particular, if the landlord is not abiding by that responsibility. I think we acknowledge in the report that it's much needed maintenance and repairs. Is there any recourse for lessees?
If the lessee feels that we aren't adhering to the terms of the lease, they yes, they can issue proceedings. Obviously, the first port of call is to make a formal complaint or at least speak to an officer just at the general inquiry. But if they've exhausted those routes, yes, they can go to court with that.
Yeah, and have any residents done that?
Not to my knowledge. No.
So I just wanted to make that point, following on from Councillor Ross's question. And I think we don't have the lead member here tonight. She's given her apologies, but this may be a point for her. To some extent, when there has been perhaps historic neglect or deferred works, this is what happens. That perhaps those works then all come at the same time, and then you maybe have a larger bill. And that might be something perhaps that the lead member might want to bear in mind going forwards.
There might be issues of neglect that leads to a leak, or at least someone might feel that a leak is caused by neglect, but it won't necessarily be attached to a major works project, if you like. It will be specific damage that was caused to the flat. So that will be dealt with possibly through the inquiry route or through the formal complaint route. But
Yeah, I guess the point I'm making is really a stitch in time saves nine. So that if the work is done regularly in a timely way, I think of my own example where we have cyclical works every 3 years, end of. Everybody knows what's coming and that work is kept to a manageable size and expense. And I know I'll come to my death later, I just wanted to jump on your point. But I know there are issues around the lease that determine how these things go, but yeah, it's my point to believe number. Councillor North.
I just want to pick up on the communication and concentrate that we've heard tonight, and I know came up in our affairs conference fairly recently. Do you get any, what's the feedback that you get? Are residents happy with the communication and the consultation? Because we keep hearing anecdotally that that's not the case. And do you have a record of that?
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think across the capital program, I think there is certainly a space for improvement in the way that we maximise participation from residents on a given block or an estate for a major works project. It is a recurring issue of not having huge amounts of attendance at meetings, which were, during COVID, it was a time of online, now it's in person. I think it is something that I would say on each scheme there's more we could be doing to try to maximise different members across the block or the property to attend, because I think that then demonstrates greater representation for the people that are undergoing the works. I think that it's a mixed response in terms of how people feel the consultation and the engagement is. I think with a lot of work going on any given estate from various service areas, sometimes there is information overload that does, I think, dilute what we're trying to achieve here with the major works, which is ensure that the most people are engaged as possible. But our resident liaison officers do proactively reach out to individuals to try to encourage attendance, to give their views so that they can be taken on board. But it is definitely a work in progress.
But one particular good example was actually the lead member that took me to this. I went to a meeting in a state in Bloomington, and it was a kind of workshop evening where the officers were there explaining why this work was going on and that there was going to be new standards, and also to identify the work that people, when they were on site with high vis, you would come up and speak to them.
Mm-hmm.
And our residents said they preferred to do that than to write in, and I thought it was quite a good idea.
Yeah. Sorry, I was going to say, kind of these guys are the experts, but my general experience with this kind of thing is that, exactly as you say, Councillor, different people have different preferences, and there's not going to be one method which is going to be the way to do it is to offer a variety of ways. Some people will prefer just to get something to their letterbox and then to absorb that information and to have a phone number or email address they can contact it if they want to. Others will prefer exactly the kind of more interactive, engaging session that you're describing. I think that within the resources available, the challenge for us is to make sure we're laying on a wide enough variety of those options so that we're kind of meeting as many people where their preferences are as possible.
And there is often a difference with some states where they get the regular officers that everybody know of the state, and there's a particular one in my own ward where I know that we haven't had that continuity, that somebody left and somebody came and then they went off on maternity, and someone else has come along, and it's kind of like we still got the officers for that state going 2 years on now. So it's some are doing good and some are need some more updating. Yeah, very well.
Thank you very much. I've got 2 questions, but can I just pick up on 2 of the issues that were raised? Scaffolding security. What is the policy and what is the enforcement of that policy?
Sure. So scaffolds under the CDM regulations, so construction design and management regulations, safe access, we need to have that there. They have to be alarmed, of which all of our scaffolds for major works are alarmed. They have to have a weekly inspection for safety and security, and that is undertaken on all of our schemes with active scaffolds. I think there's an example of a large scale scheme in North Kensington that has a number of intruders that have been climbing or sort of scaling the scaffolding. Twice in the past few weeks, it has deterred them through having the alarms activate, and then people who have seen them as soon as the alarms have gone off, disembark, we've been able to report it to the police. But I think the housekeeping practices about lifting the ladders when they're not in use, so that it's not an easy thing to climb, is something that the site teams have to stay on. We do proactive health and safety inspections of our sites, whether that's through our property services health and safety team or our external principal designers and health and safety advisors. It's something to remain vigilant on. If there's a scaffold there, it's a risk that we have to make sure we're monitoring.
None of those checks done out of hours.
The checks of the
You're actually seeing what it is like in reality.
I would say it's a mixture of checks. I wouldn't say that there's a standard time where they would go and thing, but case by case, we would look to do different inspections at different times, especially if there's an incident that's been reported. We would try to make sure that we can, do something slightly different so that we can prevent that from occurring again.
Could I suggest it might be worth doing some proactive out of hours checks in order that you early in jobs, in order that you establish the routine?
Yeah, most definitely.
Could I just turn to the payment options? Two things. Could you talk through what have been the trends, and are we seeing more people turning to payment options? And if so, are you seeing more usage of the longer payment periods? And what's the feedback?
We've seen, well, as you can see from the report, we've only recently really started to build major works again. So, and from that, I think we've been surprised. There's been quite a lot of people paying in full, and that's because it's a discount. We think that obviously attracts that type of payment. But then the payment option that that's used more often is a 5-year payment option. So our non-residential leaseholders have less generous payment options, so they can pay up to 3 years, and most of them are using that 3 years in the hope that they're going to pay it off in 2. So yes, we've just built the last quarter a couple of weeks ago. So that's still that we haven't quite got to a point where we could even send the first reminder letter. So we're still in a very much early stage on that. So, but the older major we built in the last year, I would say the majority is paid on payment options.
Could I suggest it'd be really helpful to actually see that breakdown and also see if there's a trend coming through? Can I actually just now turn to the payment options? So page 25, 5.49. And you talked about a payment discount of 5%. I was trying to get my head around what this means to the figures that the council recovered. So who makes up that 5%? Because surely it must be payable to the contractor for doing the works. So do we take 5% hit, or in fact is it actually a 5% extra that it's a bit like paying your speed to get really partly fine at the
Are we actually charging premium as it were to the people who don't pay?
Yes.
But that is how it works. Yes, it is actually the money we save by not offering a payment option in that case. So we get the money in earlier in a lump sum payment. So I mean, not having to fund the loan essentially.
So the discount accounts for the 100% cost, as it were, from which that 5% is discounted, includes the cost to the council of effectively having to pay the contractor before we get the money in from the repayment. And so the 95% cost that the upfront payers pay is, as it were, the full share, if I'm saying it right, of what's payable to the contractor, the share of what's payable to the contractor at the time with the
100% is the full share.
And
It's payable to the contractor. Sorry, the 100% is what's payable. So yes, we take not from the 5%, but overall, all the invoices, it's still better for us to get the majority of the money in straight away than having to fund it in interest-free loans.
There's essentially a subsidy coming from, whether it's coming from people who are paying in instalments and paying interest. But then surely that then also costs council.
Yes, it was definitely part of the cabinet report we did in 2020, so that I could pick that up again, and just because the rationale was explained in that cabinet report or leadership report. Sorry, yes.
And so, if I then turn to paragraph 5.53, where people do take payment options, so that there's it by over 20 years. How is that affected? And again, this comes back to Dan's point about the HRA and the funding within. But how do you manage that? If in fact we see more and more residents moving to payment options, and council at some stage is having to fund more upfront, and how does that impact the HRA and the, as explained in the books and carried through in reality in terms of the actual impact on the HRA?
I wouldn't.
No, do you know what? I think we need the HRA accountant again to help us with that answer.
Yeah.
I suspect probably that rather than us try and risk giving you an incomplete answer to that, I wonder if we might take that question away and come back with a written answer. That's all right. It's a good question.
So, yes, I would like to start with a question that's raised by one of the residents who's come to speak tonight around issues with works not being rectified within the defects liability period and instead being done as repair. Do we know, we have one example here at Hortensia House where it's happened. Do we know if that is particularly widespread? Are there other examples? And do we know the reason why?
So there have been reported incidents where a resident may call to report a leak or something that's damaged to the repairs call centre. And through a lack of updating the call centre with details of the defect liability period in terms of who's liable and the contact information, incorrectly, there have been instances where a repairs contractor may be called to attend. I don't have the details and the quantum and the locations, and it's something we could look into. It is very much an isolated incident in that the handover process for when a major work project finishes, our internal records are updated to say the project's now entered into the defects liability period for 12 months. This is the project manager and this is the contract name. So we know who to call if there is an incident that's reported and it's something that they're liable for as it was part of their major work project. I would like to think that it's very much an isolated incident where there's been effectively the incorrect contractor doing the works.
So presumably, defects liability period when it comes to an end, when the works are signed off, any defect could be picked up. Or are we relying on resident reports for defects?
So there's attendances by the project team, whether it's the contract administrator, the project manager, the clerk of works, all of them together, or at least the contract administrator, where they have to audit or walk around to view it in person before signing off that the works have satisfactorily been completed. Residents and ward councillors are invited to walk arounds of blocks and estates. During that initial walk around before we enter into defects liability period, to give the opportunity to raise any concerns. That's all taken into account, and then the contract administrator has to administer or issue the list for defect rectification.
Thank you. So we hope that that's an isolated incident.
I agree.
Okay, so moving on to my other questions. I wanted to ask about the leases, because you mentioned that there are older leases before, I think, 2019 that do not, I mean, it has to be charged in one go. If I am looking at around about 5.8, I think it is. We're only allowing for the cost associated with repairs to be charged and not improvements.
Yeah.
So we are clear that for most of the leases then, improvements cannot be charged to leaseholders.
Yes.
So then in that case, where's the other part of leases? We have done a.
Yes, please do. Does that mean you have mixed tenure on some blocks whereby you have 2019 leases? Subsequently, okay. So some blocks, some leaseholders.
You will have a mixture on each estate, or roughly on each estate. You will have some leaseholders who will be, we would be able to recharge for improvements, but others we won't.
So where we have improvements, if they're an older lease, they cannot be charged and they're not being charged. It's a leasehold.
If they have an older lease, but they've extended that lease on a voluntary lease extension, that's also would mean that they would get a new lease, and that lease will also mean that they could be charged improvements. So the leaseholder may have been there for a very long time, but on voluntary lease extension, they get a new lease.
There are two kinds of lease extensions, the voluntary and the statutory. Voluntary, I think this is an oversimplification, but I think voluntary lease extension, you pay a bit less to extend the lease, but you take on more obligations. The statutory lease extension, you pay a high premium, but more of the obligations remain.
Yes, the same lease just gets extended.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And I think everyone has the option at the point of.
Oh, yes, you have the choice. Yeah.
So I wanted to ask also about historic TMO repairs. Do we have any idea of the number of concerns raised by lessees about those relative to more recent ones?
So in terms of the historic major works completed by the TMO, yes, there's a tracking list of outstanding service charge or payments that have not yet been settled that between the home ownership team with support of the delivery team. It's an ongoing piece where there's individual casework on a case-by-case basis, but it is something that the council are aware of.
Would you say that was a significant issue specifically related to the historic works?
I wouldn't say so. I think with the historic works, some of those works were carried out 6-7 years ago now. So clearly there's been a lot of time, whereas with the new major works, we have had a year now. So we still very much, it's a new process on the new ones. So it would be very hard to compare the new ones to the old ones here. But even on the old TMO type of work, we don't have all that been on percentage basis, the majority of that's being collected or on payment options by now. So but yes, it will be now like every exercise of collection, you're always going to end up with collecting majority, and then you're going to have the ones that's really difficult to resolve, or the disputes or complaints or things that you need to deal with. And on the old TMO work, that's where we are at. But for the new work, we are still in a very much, we just hardly deal with it.
Of course. So with the historic TMO work, my concern was more about how much of that is being challenged still.
That's a difficult question to answer right now, but I mean, I know on one scheme, I personally know about 13 or 14, but there could be more. I mean, these are what's known to me as opposed to my team. So yes, there's definitely some disputes still going on, and that would be for a range of reasons. It could be about the quality of work or the perceived quality of work, or ranging all the way up to affordability. So it could be anything.
Sure. That's helpful. It gives us, I think, a little bit of an idea of the same scale of what we're dealing with there. Thank you. I wanted to also look at work on 5.47. Where we're looking at the number of complaints from leaseholders in 2023 to 2024. And we can see how many were escalated to stage 2 in the Ombudsman. And I was wondering if we could maybe have a little bit more detail, because I think when we see the number of complaints and the sorts of outcomes and the level that they're going to, I think that gives us as a committee a clearer idea of what are the scales of the problems that residents are looking at here. So I wonder whether perhaps we might agree to ask for some more information on that, further detail. That'd be okay? Good.
And is that, sorry, just to correct,
Yes.
councillor, is that in the context of the nature of the complaint? The response the council provided and then anything that's outstanding?
Yes, and we're also referring here to formal complaints.
Yes.
And I wonder if does that imply that they're also informal?
I think, I mean, from a
Thanks.
project delivery perspective, I would say that it's common that queries or complaints may arise throughout the delivery of a project. And I think the opportunity for the officer responsible for that area is given the chance to speak with the resident, understand what the issue may be. And I think a lot of the time through explaining what's necessary or what's happening, that doesn't get escalated to a formal complaint. But obviously councils are encouraged and directed, residents to the formal complaint process if they want to opt with that. So that it's very clear where they can go with that complaint. But I think through delivery of works that are intrusive, noisy and loud, I think it's natural that there will be issues that do arise through a project. But I think the relationships between the delivery staff and residents is generally quite positive. That means that complaints aren't escalated because the residents are satisfied with the information they received.
Thank you. I've just got a couple more, sorry, please bear with me. 5.32. Where we're looking at defects again. What sort of success or performance do you see in rectifying the defects where they occur, where they are identified within the period?
There's been a mixed result of that. Finding if there's a series of defects that are reported that are perceived as minor, getting the contractor to attend quite quickly has proven difficult at times, whereby they, from an operational perspective, would like to be able to do all the defects at once. And if there are a number of items that are minor that may not result in any serious damage or disruption to the residents, I think it's reasonable that they're allowed to attend with their team and do it over a number of days, opposed to piecemeal approach over a longer period. For the more urgent ones, that's where we really ensure that they come back very quickly. Under the new housing management framework, in terms of procuring our work through, there's KPIs that are very clearly outlined in terms of the urgency of defects, how they attend, when they attend, and that scores them for future tender opportunities. That's something that wasn't part of some of the original contracts that we've let, but the new framework that is being procured at the moment is very clear as a performance indicator that they must attend in certain times, otherwise they're marked down for future opportunities.
Excellent, thank you. I think that may be the end of my questions. Yes, Joanna.
One more question. When you ask for feedback on contractors, how do you differentiate between feedback on a firm as opposed to feedback on A or B individuals? Because they can be miles apart in their workmanship. But if you're asking for feedback on a contractor, you tend to lose that definition.
And is that in the context of asking residents for feedback on the contractor?
Well, yes, in terms of are they any good?
Sure.
And you go, actually, overall the satisfaction is very high, and the answer is yes. But actually, Joe Bloggs was lousy, but that never gets fed back in.
So we do try to that's a good point, because you're 100% right. The organisation may have a name for good or bad, but then it's the site team that's actually there, which is, subjective to how they perform. So when we do send our satisfaction surveys out, we try to pry into that of how the site management was, which is something that aligns with the site manager or the contract manager or the resident liaison officer. We also try to ask about the quality of work, which I think can give a picture of the organisation as a whole. But we do try to pry into the differentiation, the different levels, let's say, of the organisation delivering the work.
Do you think we should pry more?
I think so. I think there's room for improvement in how we engage feedback from residents that can influence future schemes. And then going back to the question from Councillor North about engagement and participation, the uptake on satisfaction surveys isn't as high as I'd like it to be. There's a lot of verbal and anecdotal feedback, but I think formally receiving the KPI returns for that is something that we need to improve on. And the onus is on us to maximise that participation.
Can I ask, would you mind liaising with the lady who spoke to you?
Yes,
I think
definitely.
that was a case that I think we're all quite concerned about.
I think especially for Hortensia, most definitely.
Question, thank you. So returning to costs, fees for major works. Most of the buildings that we're talking about will have a combination of tenants and leaseholders. How do you apportion between the tenants and leaseholders?
So the cost is a portion across the entire block. Doesn't matter which tenure, so it's based on the size of the flat, the number of bedrooms, and then we recharge the cost that's allocated to leaseholders to the leaseholders. We don't send a bill to tenants. Tenants, that cost will be covered in their rent.
But presumably their rents won't cover anywhere near costs.
Well,
So presumably we are
All
subsidised.
the rent cost is full, so
Yeah.
it's paid.
It's paid for from the housing revenue account,
Yes.
which consists of income from rents across the piece. So you're right, it's not directly as
From
it
that.
high populated rents from that account.
Following on from that, I think one of the issues that I'm aware of on this topic is around the accuracy of billing. And I think there have been sometimes some issues around that. And it might be helpful, I think, for the committee to know what exactly is the scale of that problem. How many errors do you find are being reported or challenged as possible errors?
On major works, not very often. I mean, again, we're very new into the billing cycle where we are at. So no, but I haven't seen it on new ones. But what would normally happen on a major works contract is as it progresses, some leaseholders might be in dispute about some elements of the work, saying that hasn't happened, and on the final account it would be charged. And we may send the project manager out to look at it again, reach a view, and if he then decides we should rather not recharge because the work isn't at the quality that they would expect, for instance, then we'll remove that cost from the final account, and that reduction will be reflected across the whole block. So all the leaseholders will receive a credit for that element of work. And so that's not necessarily a calculation error. That's more trying to get the final accounts to agree that everybody agrees that is the final.
Yeah. Because it has to be reasonable charge and the quality has to be deemed to be reasonable as well.
Yes.
Can I just ask one more?
Yes.
Just to clarify, the money for the major works, it all comes out of the housing revenue account.
Yes.
It does not come out of the capital.
The general fund capital program, no, that's separate.
So that the capital program is for new build.
Yeah, exactly. And for the portion of the new build that is then becomes social rent, there's what's called an appropriation. Effectively, the HRA buys it off the general fund at the point that it's completed and becomes occupied as social rent. And then the non-social rent component remains in general.
But is it not also the case that we can borrow of the HRA as well?
Yeah,
That's
we could borrow the
used.
HRA. Yeah, absolutely. But you need to do so in a kind of prudential, sustainable way that you can afford the things. Yeah.
Going back to defects. So there comes a stage where the contractor really feels it's diminishing, not worth it. They're they're on to the next job. It's much more, that's the revenue. They're only talking about, for them, small amounts of money, or indeed you've paid out. But the residents are highly frustrated because the work hasn't been done to the standard that they would expect, and if they contract directly. How do we resolve that? Because you've still got unhappy residents and you've got a contractor who's walked away and feels they fulfill.
So I guess contractually with the provision of retention money, of which 5% of the contract sum is retained throughout the life of the project. When practical completion is issued, we release 2.5% of that. So the remaining 2.5, which may be a nominal amount in a lot of instances. And I think there are many reports of contractors deciding that's not worth their time and they'll move on. Fortunately, I can say for the major works that we're delivering at the moment, that hasn't been an issue. We have had contractors re-attend as necessary to rectify, albeit with issues that were raised earlier, and some other issues where we are still working with contractors to attend. The next point would really be taking enforcement action against them through litigation. We haven't had to reach that point yet, but that's where a judgment call from the council has to be made about whether the legal cost to pursue such a matter is necessary for that given case. I would like to.
And how do you communicate that with residents? Because the residents are still dissatisfied with the work. You're stuck between rock and hard place.
I think in this sort of hypothetical situation, if we were to, the onus would be on the delivery team to be effectively be transparent with what's happening and keep them in the loop. An alternative approach, which we could also look at, is through colleagues in, say, repairs who have responsive contractors. We may need to make a call to get them to attend to address the issue while we can currently approach the litigation with the contractor. Whilst that's not an ideal scenario, because the owner should be able to contract to do what they're contracted to do. If we're not getting anywhere, but we have an issue that we know about, that the residents are complaining about, I think we have a duty to act on that and address that at the time, and then seek to recoup the funds.
Who would pay for the legal action in the event that you had to take legal action against a contractor? The HRA.
Well, I guess the HRA, which funds the capital program, is where those costs would be borne. I don't know if
They
there's.
have to make a judgment about whether our kind of the cost incurred and our legal advice on the chances of success was worth the cost of action, as you would with any legal action.
So is 5% retention on a contract, is that usual across?
Yes.
So it wouldn't be a sensible thing to think about increasing that because you wouldn't get the tenders.
And that's a really good point. I guess the industry expectations that's what contractors would be paying, and increasing it, I think, would reduce our chance of attracting more bids. Like I said, I think the success of getting the contractors back to do what they're contracted to do has been good, and I'd like that to continue.
Good. Did I see another question from you? Okay. So in that case, thank you very much to everyone and sitting through so many questions. We've had, I think, a very informative and useful discussion on this item.
We'll link up to the team on the follow-up actions.
Yes, yes, I was just going to do a quick summary of those, but I guess they will be minuted. So there's some further information that we would like. And that includes looking at more detail on complaints, the legal actions and disputes around quality, and details on different options, different take-up of the different payment options as well, I think. And also a link to the leadership report of 2020 would be
Can you just repeat the second one? Because I don't think I've made a note of that. You said something about disputes and legal action.
yeah, so where we're looking at complaints,
Yes.
and disputes around quality in particular.
Okay, sure.
Or
Sorry.
the chargeability,
Yeah.
give a bit more detail.
Thank you.
It would be helpful to know what are the kind of things, traits, and also what volume are we looking at and what outcomes. So, thank you very much, everyone. Thank you. We now move on to A5, which is your additional papers. It is the response recommendations and resident conference of repairs. The report sets out the lead members' responses to the recommendations, which were agreed at our committee meeting on the 13th of May. So I would like to invite any comments on the committee on this paper. Mr. Guardian.
Thank you. I think I found it somewhat frustrating that the responses essentially said, "Oh yes, we already do this." Given the residents' meeting, which seems comments were raised, was essentially saying that they don't do it. Yes, things haven't been working sufficiently well. So there's that general thing about actually whether some cases need a better review. Just on the tradespeople, again, the point I just made to Mr. Heritage, about the level at which we can score an individual as opposed to just a rating an organisation only. And then I was intrigued about 1.3, this concept of post inspections. And we're all very good now with cameras about taking a picture at a certain angle to avoid showing the substandard element. And I wondered to what extent we could do anything about repeat offenders.
That question for me, sorry.
Oh, you're sorry, you're being.
Well, yeah, I'm certainly not be able to answer any detailed questions about this. So you wanted to know about the rigorousness of the desktop post inspection.
It's threefold. So the opportunity that arose with James Heritage on the last paper, which is to what extent you can drill down to the individual level of the contractor's work as opposed to an organisation.
Yeah, although this is the difference here is that this is not major works, this is repairs. So for the most part, we're talking here about, as it were, council employees rather than contractors, although there are contractors involved as well.
And that was feedback at the conference, was that actually things weren't working as well as we were patting ourselves on our back, saying they were. And so when the recommendations came through, this is what you're saying, so you've accepted and you're kind of going, you already, so for example, customer satisfaction surveys do take place, allowing residents to rate both the housing officers and those who did the repair.
Yeah.
So my question on that was actually, are you rating the organisation, i.e. the company that does the repair, as opposed to James Blogs or Company X?
But I think at that point you're rating your experience of the repair. So I think in a way it's probably not quite fair on the resident to make a distinction. They're rating the person who turned up to do the repair. So I don't think we're asking them to make a distinction between the company and the person there, because their experience of the company is defined by the person in that situation. Does that make sense?
I mean, well, perhaps it would be useful to see a response, a survey satisfaction form, to actually look at what the questions are that you ask and whether you're asking the right questions. Because my takeaway from that conference was that lots of people would be sent along to look at the repair, and it would take ages to actually get somebody interested in the repair, and then the work was done to a shoddy standard. Not in all cases.
No,
but
I understand.
the
The recommendation here was an opportunity to rate the tradespeople, which was something we do often.
Yeah, but that's, you're saying you already do it, and actually feedback.
If it's something that's already being done, then it's difficult to see why residents would be requesting it. Ditto for item number 1, the ability to attach a photo. Why are residents asking for this if they're already allowed? Councillor
Yes, I just want to really echo what you and Councillor Gardner have said, that we all sat through the that conference and people were unhappy. And even though, you know, we understand that the people who are going to turn up and say things are the people who are dissatisfied, not the ones who are satisfied. But even still, to have all the answers, but we already do that, is not really satisfactory. And I went to another conference last week, which I'll come on to in a minute when the chair asked me to. Again, there were levels of dissatisfaction. And so, yeah, just to get answers, but we do that when clearly it's not working in some cases. I think we have to try harder.
So exactly. So perhaps the focus needs to be on, because what you're seeing here is a kind of good faith reflection of the kind of the policy and practice that is supposed to be in place in the department. What we're saying is, and perhaps in any large landlord, this is to a certain extent inevitable, although we shouldn't sit back and accept it, that sometimes we don't meet the standards we set ourselves. Then really what we need is to give you some assurance about how we're seeking to continuously improve those standards, and crucially, I guess, what we do when from time to time we fail to meet them.
Yeah, we need to try harder, I think.
Yeah, and I think at the second item number 1,
Yes.
right, there's should be given a target date. Well, that's what we're sort of saying. Yes, they should be. So it's accepted, but the question is, are they given a target date? You see,
Yeah.
so I think,
And I guess to a certain extent, what we're saying in all of these cases is here are the standards we set ourselves. And so, but you're absolutely right. Implicit in the feedback we got at that event, which I was at too, is that we don't always meet those standards. And so I think kind of, the recommendations are these things should happen. What we're saying is we agree, and that's already the standard we set ourselves. So as I say, I think the territory we're on is kind of, why isn't it always happening? And to the extent it's not always happening, what's the right way to react to that? If you see what I'm saying.
so I think, as we will see when we come to the next agenda item, repairs as an item continues to be on our programme for the coming year. And I think maybe the other pieces of work that have been done on this lead member response needs to feed into that going forward. But I think we can have it minuted that I think as a committee were agreed that some of this is not really as satisfactory as we would like, and that therefore we'll be taking it forward. Yes.
So technical point really on this appendix, it sort of comes across as a draft that somebody put together as a formal response select committee recommendation. So you can see that with 2 1s, for example. So that's A, I think there should be, and we do have formal document responses for these things. So I'd like to see that next. I don't think I'm being pedantic at that point. It is.
We're happy to work with the team to do it in a format.
The second point, I think it's been sort of alluded to. The answers do seem to be very short, rather than really thinking deeply about why the recommendations were made. Again, it just appears to be rather superficial in that sense. The last point I made is more of a general one, and it's the lead member is here to hear this as well. If there's recommendations that lead member does not agree with, it would almost be better if they say that they don't agree with it, rather than having things like partially accepted, which often seems to happen in some of these recommendations. It would almost be more useful in a sense if you knew that there's something that you don't agree with, so we can have a discussion around that. So things like partially accepted. Number 6, for example, it's not even clear what that really means. So that would be my feedback on this, having not been involved with previously with you.
Yeah, one thing I'm just completely understand what you're saying. I think what we're trying to say in part 6 in good faith is that if we were sure we didn't agree with this, we would say not accepted. I think what we're saying is we're not sure, we need to look at it a bit harder, if you see what I mean. I'm not shy about saying not accepted if I think that's the answer, that's the advice I would give the lead member. But I think in this case, genuinely, it was something which kind of we wanted to go and look at a bit harder.
So I would also like to ask the lead member, why does she think that these recommendations have come from the resident feedback if she believes that the things that are currently in place are currently in place?
Yeah, I guess that takes us back to what we were talking about before. Yeah.
And then just quickly on the partially accepted items, I think the one about the full boards, perhaps we could request for the update when further discussion has been had. I think that would be useful. And I think with the checking the quality of all jobs, we're looking based on value, I see. And I'm just wondering whether we may have small value jobs, but high volumes of them, which would then add up to a high value also. So I would ask again a question about the system for reporting poor quality repairs by residents. That's another question.
Yeah, I think, I'm sorry we haven't got to you here to answer these questions in detail, but it sounds from what you said earlier, Councillor, that there might be some interest in the committee kind of looking a bit more deeply into this issue as part of the coming year's work. So it's probably worth us. Yes, including perhaps, for example, the question of kind of following up on point 6 once some further work has been done, but also digging a bit deeper into what's realistic for those lower value repairs. But we should kind of build those questions into a more kind of detailed look at this perhaps later in the year.
Yes.
We can make sure we've got the right people here to answer those detailed questions. That might be more fruitful than us taking away your comments here and kind of coming back with written answers. You certainly can do that as well. It feels to me like there's sufficient interest in this that you might want to return to it in a kind of session and meeting.
There's sufficient concern, yes.
Yeah.
I think I would like to put these questions written to the lead member.
Okay.
I think we're all agreed.
Yes, I also just ask, it would be very helpful to understand what the contractual obligation is in terms of do our contractors get paid per visit? Because we heard a lot about them kind of looping back
Right.
and having to come back in every time, and at what stage do they get paid? So be very helpful to understand the contractual basis.
I agree. So that's another question to be added to the list. So that being said, we will now move to the next item on our agenda, which is paper A6, the Select Committee Work Programme. And this report, this report sets out the development of the Select Committee's work programme, identifying priorities for the municipal year 2024 to 2025. Committee members are recommended to confirm their scrutiny priorities for the municipal year as set out in Appendix 1, which will be presented to the Overview and Scrutiny Committee on the 17th of July 2024. And also to agree to develop a detailed work programme setting out reports and items to schedule meetings of the Housing and Community Select Committee in the next municipal year. Can I just ask so that we know, are some of the residents present? Are they wishing to speak to this item? Yes, thank you. So I know. So we will start with committee. Would any committee member like to start the discussion?
Should I jump in at repairs?
Do.
Because I've been asked to do that. So this also covers the older boys, because I went to a conference at the Cremorne Club Room the 9th of July, and this was arranged by the Forum for Chelsea and the Kensington Chelsea Forum for the over 50s. So it was older people there. And so firstly, what came out is there was a consultation going on at the moment about repairs, but nobody who attended was aware of this consultation. And we had Paul Beecham and James Carroll, they were there, and from the officers, and also Amanda Nelson, she was there at this meeting. So they agreed that people who were older could be provided with paper copies of everything that they needed to see the consultation. There were various people from the Wales End estate, so some of this is specific. So there was an issue raised about the Wales End estate and the pipe works and the water. There being water all over the estate, and that hasn't been sorted out. And there was smells apparently of raw sewage. Another individual item that was raised was at Elm Park Gardens, where a lady, they had fobs to get in, and the fob failed. So she was outside the house for hours and hours and hours. So I suggested having a key as well, but apparently that doesn't work. So suggesting that there was a number that you could sort of input there so that people didn't get locked out. And just in general, there were issues about consultation, about how and how they reported repairs. So one of the, I mean, I went to the call centre in Pembroke Road, so I know, but one of the ladies was saying that it was in Birmingham, the place that she had to ring up. So out of hours, we don't have, it's not in Pembroke Road, they're answering it somewhere else. What also came out of it is the office was, the thing of not getting the same person all the time, or having to repeatedly ring up and sort of re-explain the problem when they'd already done it sort of before. And so the officers explained that there were 3 different systems that were running at the moment, and there was a difficulty in trying to interface them. So I would make the suggestion that money needs to be spent so that the system works properly and there's just one system. Yeah, so in general, there were other more specific things that people made complaints and they're not followed up, etc., etc. But I think the main thing is really one of communication of when people report the repairs and how it's dealt with. So the out of hours thing, apparently that's inevitable, that it's not in the borough, that it has to be somewhere else. So yeah, those are the main things, and I think people felt that they didn't know the person who was dealing with their complaints. And so I have to say, I think it was really good that the officers came down and spoke to people, and they were picking up the individual complaints there. So I mean, overall it was a good session, but I was asked to bring this to scrutiny, so I have. Okay.
Thank you. So we can see on page 39, we have repairs under item 7 to continue the review of repairs in light of the repairs conference, May 2024 report. And I think we can add the lead member's response and also the TCC resident scrutiny report, which is going to be coming. So I think we'll all agree that's an important item to continue with. Read. So just to go through appendix 1, we have the reports to the select committees, 7 items there, which we can all see. We have section B, which is a deep dive. These are items which the select committee will be conducting an in-depth analysis over the course of 2 to 3 months. One of those, consultation and engagement, and the second one, temporary accommodation. And then we are suggesting a residents' conference and evidence session. I think it may be over the year that we might end up having more than one of these as necessary. But for now, we have the Lancaster West refurbishment to hear from those residents prior to the report coming to committee. And then we have some items for a watching brief, which include Canal Side House, information, advice and guidance, damp and mould, and of course horizon scanning future communities work. And these are items which we hope to keep under review during the year and to request more information and possibly a report depending on what the data tells us. I have one item which I wish to add onto this list, which is the works at Hazelwood and Adair Towers. Which section? I think that may be probably a report, just because of the ongoing concerns that residents have around that work. I think it does need to come to the committee. So in terms of the rest of the reports, we have Grenfell, which is looking at the scope, scale and timelines of Lancaster West refurbishment. We have fire safety, older voice, disabled access provision, resident associations, voluntary sector selection processes and repairs, which I think gives us quite a lot to get our teeth into.
I know this is not quite my role in this conversation. Do you mind if I ask a question just for clarification about
Please do.
item 5?
Please do.
Which is, given that the scope of this committee is both housing and communities, I just
Yes.
wanted to make sure, when it says residents associations here, is your preference to focus specifically on residents associations in respect to council housing? Or do you see it more widely as residents associations across the borough, including in blocks where the council isn't planning? Because it could go either way, with either the housing focus or a wider focus, including the communities department. Certainly, I just want to make sure we're all clear when we're
Yes.
talking about the same thing.
Me personally, I would say I see it as both.
Right.
I understand that for instance, KCSC is one of its pieces of work is to support resident associations of any tenure. And I feel that the committee will be agreed that it's important for the council to be supporting the building capacity of all resident associations, albeit within council landlord housing. There may be different.
Yeah, of course.
processes.
What we should just make sure that we work with the team to make sure that report is a two-hander so that you get both sides of it.
Any other comments from the committee? In that case, I'd like to invite the residents to come.
Anyway, could I ask that we join you at the main table so that we get decent eye contact with
Yeah,
all
we
of your
make
colleagues?
Certainly.
Thank you very much.
Just to say, I think, I hope that the hostels working group report will be available
Yes,
in September.
excellent.
I think we should, I think we've got another couple of visits to make, but I think we should aim for September. Okay.
Thank you.
Good evening, thank you for the time and space. Please.
Chair, first of all, we'll do introductions.
So my name's Mimi. I am here as a resident from the Wells End Estate, but also as a member of the WNAG group, which got together to resist the closure of our information and advice centre. And out of that has built a whole heap of other things. Today, I'm here to talk a little bit about concerns around IAG, contracting, but also the subjects that you've been covering around repairs and housing standards.
It would be rude not to say good evening to Joanna and to Marie-Therese, who I served with when I was a councillor, and to yourself, Chair, who I had the joy of quite a long conversation following quite an interesting AGM. My name is Keith Cunningham. I was a councillor in the two of the northern wards for 16 years and leader of the opposition for 7.5. I'm here this evening because I've been offering pro bono advice to the World's End residents ever since the advice centre was closed prematurely in our view and wrongly, and also as a long-standing resident of Stanley Hall for over 46 years. I'm also been involved in some council projects recently, namely the IAG project and what is referred to as the World's End project, but covers now Stanley Ward, parts of Stanley Ward as well. Your item is down for discussion. We're hoping to help you with that. I've had prior conversations with Jackie Hurd, and I understand fully what the strictures of this committee are in terms of what can be said and what shouldn't be said. And I put her at her ease in reminding her that although a long time ago I chaired cabinet scrutiny for 6 years, the other thing I think that's worth saying is that I've also spoken with Luke Curran, Governance Officer, yourself, Chair, and today, Emily, your committee clerk. And if it is helpful, I've offered to leave our notes with the committee clerk if it helps you in your discussions afterwards. I'm going to start with regard to the Localism Act 2011, and Mimi will concentrate on the Housing Directorate. I have to say that at the outset, I'm very pleased that you've still got repairs on your list. But we believe the Housing Directorate per se is a failing directorate, and that your scope should be wider and longer in terms of going through the whole of that directorate in a detailed and coherent way. Such is the concern with those that it interfaces with, not helped by the fact that the senior staff in the directorate do not appear to believe that face-to-face meetings with residents are helpful or actually a part of their job role. Anyway, I'll leave that to Mimi. Why are we bringing the Localism Act to your attention? We believe you should undertake a discrete piece of work to establish how Kensington and Chelsea Council interprets its duties under the Localism Act 2011, and whether this is unduly narrow or restrictive by way of interpretation. Just to remind you, it's legislation which places a responsibility on local authorities, a statutory responsibility, when engaging with residents in carrying out its duties. The predecessor legislation was the 2000 Local Government Act Part 2, which specified the local authority's role in terms of community leadership and economic well-being responsibilities. And we've listed 3 areas of concern. The first is that RVKC are interpreting the legislation too narrowly, and we believe there are multiple examples of this. First of all, the information, advice and guidance, resident involvement, initially in specifying the contract requirements and the guidance to tenderers, and latterly alongside officers scoring the 2 consortium which bid against a template in addition to a written submission they made, also an oral presentation at that scoring exercise. It was a remarkable experience, I have to say, one which I'm pleased I don't have to repeat. The local knowledge of residents was welcomed at the outset. That was for the specifying the contract requirements and the guidance to tenderers. But latterly, when it came to scoring, suddenly it was seen as an impediment to our objectivity, and subsequently it became an officer-only exercise in scoring. We weren't asked, we were told that we were not going to continue because it was felt that our knowledge had suddenly become an impediment, that we couldn't be objective. One has to ask whether long-standing officers who had prior knowledge as well was it equally an impediment, or somehow did they manage to be viewed in a different way? With regard to that, unfortunately, well, I have furnished both Moira Ugoji and the lead member with a report into the failing of the scoping of that project, I have to say. And unfortunately, it led to a formal complaint against a member of staff who I felt actually done professionally. Secondly, the World's End project.
Just intervene for just 1 minute. Just like to say, in relevance to the Localism Act, leadership and well-being responsibilities, that process was for someone like me who was quite robust. It was an extremely stressful, disempowering process to have gone through. As someone from the community who has experience, knowledge, and willingness to collaborate with the local authority, so that, you know, that aspiration about making RBKC the best place to live, that isn't welcomed and also not valued. So that was just a little bit for that point. Also, that what Keith isn't saying without going back to history is that we are where we are in terms of involvement in Wales End because the WNAG group has forced RBKC's hand for any involvement. But it's been a fight to do that, a real challenge, lots of resistance, lots of pushbacks, lots of making promises that they don't actually keep, and then it's like gaslighting. So I think that needs to be considered.
So the second example is the World's End project. Originally it was just for the services, accessibility of services on the World's End estate. Subsequently, myself and others got the remit expanded. It seemed quite wrong that it should only be council housing, because other occupiers of other housing have issues about accessibility of council services. And it widened both in geography and scope, initially to involve all social housing providers, and then latterly everybody, including private sector occupiers and owners, because they all interface with council services. The point I made repeatedly to Moira Ugoji was you cannot differentiate accessibility from quality and relevance, quality of the services, because just because they're more accessible, residents will not queue up for them. So it was earmarked as, and it came from the council plan 2023 to 27 as a major project that the borough was going to roll out following the Lancaster West Estate Regeneration Project. It was highlighted as co-design, but throughout the whole process, there was only one meeting where the lead member was present, and at all times, the decision maker or makers, because on one occasion it was Sarah Soley, and latterly it was the whole of the leadership team, were at one remove from residents' groups at all other times, and officers had limited powers and oscillated between facilitators at residents' meetings and on occasions then reverted to officer-only groupings. Some residents, as a consequence of that, felt a sense of disempowerment because we had little opportunity to actually interface with the people who were going to be making the final decision. And to make it even worse, we were reliant on warm words because there was no budget line that ran alongside it. For some reason, when I was on the council, every project had a budget line, even if it was iterative. this had no budget line at all. And Callum Wilson has recently told us in a meeting that that is probably true now of about 50% of projects. The third area of concern was
Just before you go on to that, just like to say that making these 2 points are really important, because part of having lost what was a very good service, part of the criteria for the new service provider, consortium, whoever that would be, was that there was going to be co-design with the local residents about to ensure that the service that was then going to be delivered actually met the residents' needs. Since the current provider has been delivering their service, they have not met the minimum standard for IAG, which at the very, very least must mean privacy. Just privacy, but they haven't even met that criteria. And so how they've got around that is that if where it's currently being delivered, if there's enough noise in the room, then there's got to be privacy, because no one can hear what you're saying. So that's the thinking for that particular sort of point. And so this isn't really going to work, and it's not good enough, and it's very concerning that if local residents are going to be disempowered, one removed, and not actually co-design with decision makers around the table, then IAG is going to be nowhere near the standards that we had, and we know we can't have that, but it's not going to be at least good enough for the local community.
The final thing to be said about the World's End project, as if what we've said already isn't worrying enough, is almost, I mean, I've said to Mimi and others all the way through this, as somebody who scoped projects in the public sector many years ago, before I became a blonde, that it was the worst scoped public sector project I think I've ever seen. And if all of that wasn't worryingly enough, a senior manager in the Communities Directorate has written in the council's risk register that he sees the biggest concern of it being a successful project is the Housing Directorate itself, which is ironic to say the least, bearing in mind they're the sponsoring department. And never have I ever heard that. Thirdly, terminology. We would contend that terminology such as co-design is bandied around by officers loosely. We have discussed this with Moira Ugoji and Callum Wilson, with whom we enjoy excellent relations. There's no criticism of those officers. But I have to say, in our eyes, it has not been addressed to our satisfaction, despite the good intention of all parties and positive relations between those officers and ourselves. Finally, we want to help you by saying if you were prepared to do this specific piece of work, how it could be carried out. We believe it could either be by members of the select committee with officer support and taking evidence from all interested parties. And if you were prepared to go down that road on the grounds you believe that what we presented to you is serious enough, we would be happy to give evidence to it. But it could also be supplemented by an external expert eye cast over RBKC practices, for example, by another local authority commissioned to investigate and report back formally. It would probably be more sensible to have another London local authority and one with a reputation for excellent and thoroughgoing resident involvement in co-design. One such authority is Camden, but you may feel there's a conflict of interest because it wasn't that long ago that Moira was actually an officer there, but it's just a suggestion. Our concern is if it's just done in-house, the very officers that we are saying are talking that they're talking the talk but not walking the walk would be those advising you. And we think it's too close and potentially fatally flawed because of that. And we would invite you, if you do take this on, to seriously look at commissioning an external review by a local authority who do this well and have a good reputation for doing it. Thank you.
So just a note to say that at the request of the committee, so what I'm going to go on to say now is quite generic, but it's been collated from intelligence directly from the source and people being impacted. This is related, you know, this is yet another reason why we kind of want to request that this project is seriously considered and taken on, because the residents are being let down. They're, in terms of repairs, a lot of residents are living with indoor waterfalls. This is no exaggeration. Some of this goes back as far back as 2013. On one example, the tenant took the council to, you know, arranged by a company to sort of get the council to repair, and the council gave him some money, did some remedial work, but it's so bad that has been an ongoing issue since 2013. So, you know, this is something that is really serious. Residents are disempowered by the systems that are there to facilitate the things that have been discussed here today. You know, complaints, standard of repairs. If things are not gone well, you know, where do we go next? Unfortunately, there is a lot of concern in the way that things are being reported and whether you as members are actually getting an accurate representation of the reality that residents live. We don't think that you do. It can't be that, you know, people are sitting at this table and are saying, oh no, we think that's just a one-off. When I know that there is a walkway on the Wellsend estate, so I can tell you about 7 properties all along the same walkway with serious issues. And like I say, experiencing internal waterfalls when it rains. And then when it stops raining, because it's collected above them, they are continuously dealing with leaks. Some really severe. But these families have been worn down by the system and officers that are not listening, who pass people from pillar to post and simply wear them down. The big concern is that some of these really severe issues, we have, you know, senior all the way up to chief executive level being CC'd and involved in correspondence, and yet no one has reached out to these residents. And if it hadn't been for IAG, these people would probably be living in the same way. We've managed to get with an officer's support, we've managed to get some help to be able to channel those historic issues. What we found is that officers have been have appeased, so they've come out and, you know, they've begun to do things. But, you know, there's no work schedule, there's no constant communication. There is, I'm not taking responsibility for that damage of, you know, I know you put down flooring, but we're not taking responsibility for that. You got insurance, when actually, why should the resident have to pay for damage that's been caused by neglect and shoddy workmanship? a lack of coordination between contractors. And, you know, there's just generally no real accountability, but at any level of the system. It seems as well like certainly senior staff don't want to meet with the likes of me for fear that they're going to get an avalanche of residents all knocking at the door. But I'm question that. I get it, but I question it because if you're doing a good job and you know you're doing your best, why would you be worried? And so I'm not saying that they should open the door to every single resident. I'm saying that if you've got a resident that for the last 5 years has been trying to get a meeting with you, it shouldn't take 5 years and, you know, for him to turn around and say, well, actually, it's not my role. And if I'm told to by somebody higher up, I might meet you, but not willing. And so that's not, it means that they're not answerable to the people that are here paying the wages and expecting that and trusting that they are going to do the best that they can by the people that live in the local authority. And that's a real shame. There is a wide held view by residents that senior staff, instead of taking performance and monitoring, etc., they just blame the subcontractors. So before we were told that when a property has had remedial repairs or has been repaired or after a void, that somebody comes along and they do the checklist. Because the residents themselves don't have any standards. There's no point of reference. If somebody comes to do a job for me, I know that they're not the standards, but I can't phone up and say, actually, they're not the standards, because the response is, well, it's what the council provides. But there's no reference points, and that is very difficult. And so, you know, it doesn't actually work like that. People don't come and do a checklist. And if there is any faults with the repairs, you're told that you have to put it through the customer service, and it's logged on as a new repair. Why is my question? Why aren't contractors being held accountable and coming back and doing a job the first time correctly? So there's also a real ongoing concern about the culture issues within Blantyre Street neighbourhood office. There's no empathy, and I can give you there's a lot of issues going on in terms of culture, staff covering each other's backs, residents being mistreated. Recently, as part of discovering this walkway of horrendous indoor waterfalls, I was with James Carroll and his colleague Paul, I can't remember his surname, and number 3, Maggie, said, as she opened the door, she was like, oh, I've been waiting. She was in such distress, and she had said, I've got this leak coming in, I can't even go into the room. We looked at it, the ceiling is practically in. She said she'd been down to the Blantyre Street office, and that, you know, she was telling them she was very distressed, she'd just lost her partner of 50 years.
Step in quickly and just say, as this is a public meeting, I think we need to be careful what we say about third-party individuals.
I'm sorry, I apologise.
Okay.
But this is, yeah.
This is okay.
And in any case, the lady had gone down there and tried to explain the situation, and her colleague was overheard saying, "We don't do sympathy. We don't do compassion." Is what they were overheard. Now this lady doesn't want to come out of her house. It's, you know, this is things that shouldn't be going on, but they do, and they are. I think that a pressing concern that next year's works budget is insufficient to protect residents. In terms of what we've been told is that the budget that's been kind of earmarked for major works doesn't cover the works that need to be done, because as it was stated previously, the neglect and the disrepair to the level of disrepair to which the Wellsend estate has been allowed to get to means that it's now too expensive. That's not acceptable. We had recently a level of disrepair where water was coming straight from the waste pipe up through the floors, and kids were getting up in the morning and they're walking around wet floor. That shouldn't happen in this day and age in RBKC, and that had gone unseen for years. So I think that I think it's really important that, you know, these things are looked at, that meaningful resident engagement and co-design is high on the agenda, because everyone's well-meaning, but if you don't have the intelligence and you don't have the people voices that need to be around that table in order to inform how to go forward, then I think it's all a waste of time and money.
Can I just come in by way of support on this? I will be
Just a
brief.
comment if you will, because we are
Okay.
mindful of the time.
We have brought to your attention the fact we think it should go beyond repairs. At the moment, there are major issues on repairs. One is that, as Mimi said, the capital works budget, we were told by a senior member of staff in an email that the major works budget is insufficient given the complexity of the construction of the building, and another senior officer has said, given the cuts to the major works budget that have taken place as a result of this administration. I'm pleased that PERDA is out of the way. I wouldn't have been able to say that during PERDA, but that is what we have been told. Just very briefly, Chair, to run down the supporting list, we think it should be the whole directorate that is scrutinised. When we've done our research, there is only one piece of scrutiny we can find. That was commissioned by the TCC on culture. It was evidently, again, possibly ill thought out at the start. It's now been extended midway through and is not due to report till September this year. And because it was commissioned by the TCC, we don't know whether the report will be in the public domain or not. We would, if you're not already looking at the major works budget separately, could you please look at that on the grounds that if that isn't resolved, residents of the Wellsend estate could be subjected to flooding for another decade. Can you also please look at the reporting systems you get and interrogate them intensely, because what happens is a contractor comes, a surveyor or somebody signs the work off. When it's either been done badly or incorrectly, the contractor comes back and that is treated as a new job because the previous one has been signed off as completed. And that is why we're saying the reporting system is not fit for purpose and you're not getting accurate stats. We don't believe the senior staff in the department are taking ownership and responsibility for performance and failures. And we would ask you please to follow up on that. It's not enough to blame contractors and subcontractors. That is a separate thing. We don't believe also that contractors and subcontractors are effectively managed. We've just brought to your attention that Mimi can give more details, but the recent issue of inappropriate behaviour by a member of staff in the Blanchard Street office, a widely held view that senior staff in the directorate director level are not effectively managed by the lead member, the chief exec, or the executive director. a pressing, I've mentioned major works, and we say that with evidence because one of these cases, we are now, we've been invited so that it doesn't go into the hidden garden of the Housing Directorate to push historic cases up through the Communities Directorate to Callum Wilson, who reports straight to the Chief Exec. And we are very grateful for that as well, which was offered to me when she mentioned this as we were leaving a meeting about IAG. The Housing Directorate have tried twice through the head of repairs and secondly the director to wrest that back. And whilst we're happy to channel new casework in the normal way, we have resisted that.
Well, currently they've broke communication.
And Callum Wilson has supported us in resisting that because we don't want it to disappear into a hidden garden again. We would ask you please to urgently look at the major works budget, cuts that may have been carried out on it, and how you are going to exercise your scrutiny responsibilities to hold the directorate to account to ensure that residents don't face another decade of flooding. And in summary, could you please do it as quickly as possible and let us know how. Finally, we had hoped there would be residents here who you could have asked to join you at the table in terms of presenting and answering any questions. Residents who are currently being subjected to flooding, you may find it helpful if you undertake this as part of your repairs scrutiny to actually hear from the residents direct. And who knows, it may well be possible for you and your colleagues to visit some of the homes affected if the residents extend invitations for you to do so. We think you should take that up, and we think that some of these cases are so severe you will be shocked. But be in no doubt, one of the 2013 cases was copied to the 3 ward councillors, the director of housing and the chief exec of the council, together with a video attached to the email, and still nothing happened. That's 3 ward councillors, the director of housing and the chief exec of the council. Thank you.
Finally, if you want to consider seriously the local listener, then invite some of us to be part of the conversations. And let's build a partnership.
Thank you both very much, Amir, and thank you for sharing and raising these very, very important issues. Just on the subject of resident and public engagement with scrutiny, as you will be aware that we have had a resident evidence session on repairs in the last municipal year, and it's that report and the recommendations on it that we've had on this agenda. And as we've said, this continues to be high up on the agenda of the work programme for the forthcoming year. So I hope you will be in some sense assured that we continue to take this very seriously, continue to look further into it. I think if I can understand from what the various issues that you've raised, we do have the information, advice and guidance on our work programme here. We also do have consultation and engagement, and that is going to be in reference to the Localism Act in particular and related to co-design. But what I think I've understood from your presentation is that there is a range of very specific issues to the World's End project, which I understand that you are requesting and asking us to consider as a separate item.
Yeah, I mean, it's so bad. The wording, Mimi and I have withdrawn from that project because we are so concerned that it's being described as something it's not, and that officers are not being accurate in terms of the terminology they use to describe that. And we don't do that with any satisfaction. We do it with some sadness, but we have withdrawn from it. We weren't aware, incidentally, of the previous repair. I mean, it's no criticism of anybody, but we weren't aware of the previous resident input into repairs. We only learned about that. Otherwise, we would have partaken in it. And finally, if your committee clerk does want to have copies of the notes, even by way of screenshots, happy to share.
Thank you very much. Thank you both for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So we have, I think, an additional item to add in terms of the Wales End project. Do we feel agreed on that?
I think if you're adhering Charles, I think you're beginning to.
We are beginning to become very overheading, but these are important matters which we need to continue to maintain and watch and breathe. But I think from what we've heard tonight, there's certainly perhaps some information as a starting point to maintain.
Did you pick it up from the seven?
Some of it will be picked up on the exam, yes. So I think specifically the questions around the local housing management, specifically related to our support, the repairs aspect and the system for reporting will come under that. But I think it may also come under the consultation and engagement. And it will also come under the information, advice and guidance.
To clarify, were you looking at the previous letting of the IAG contract, and was that challenged at the time?
Yes, the way that the council went through that process was actually, I didn't find out until January of 2023. By that time, it left very little time for us to be able to challenge. However, we did present a petition at council in March, I believe it was, with over 1,000 signatures. So
the contract has now been let. And so was it legally challenged? Because I don't think we as a council.
No, it wasn't.
No.
And the reason was, we looked at it because the council has a duty in law to put supporting documents onto the website explaining why they are proposing to make that key decision. Those supporting documents were not on the website, and I, for one, was actively looking to see whether we could make a legal challenge. The problem was the time process was so truncated as to make that almost impossible, and the officers came up with an answer. I chaired a meeting. They wanted an independent chair. I chaired the meeting where Councillor McVeigh and two senior officers from the leader's office came down. And they claimed that the reason they didn't put supporting documents on was they didn't want to wash their dirty linen in public. The problem for them was that the service managers for 3 areas plus WENAC were there, and so it was difficult for council officers, even if they wanted to rewrite history, to rewrite it. And it was very unconvincing about not wanting to wash dirty linen in public, and that there's not a legal exemption from the Act saying, but if you don't want to wash your dirty linen in public, that's okay. By that time, it was too late. We couldn't legally challenge. The other part, the answer is this, that when we were told initially, the residents were told initially, the council would work with them. And I have to say, they are a really, really disciplined group of residents. They show more patience than I would, and some of them have got better judgment than people who I've rubbed shoulders with in this town hall. They are very good, and that they're not lightly pushed off. But when you're told, you believe it in good faith, we will help you co-design something that won't be a replacement for, but, you know, we'll take your views into account. And unfortunately, everybody believed them because there was no other game in town. And also the circumstances were propitious because we were moving from a fragile grant model to a commissioning model. And my advice to the residents was grab it with both hands, because a grant model is very fragile and every year you're looking about whether it can be sustained. A commissioning model is not so fragile. And also the contract of just over $1 million a year was significant. It's supposed to cover virtually 9,000 clients. I think it's 844 clients. And I managed, much to my surprise, in conversations with Helen Ball, who was the interim officer, and via her to people like the Chief Financial Officer and Laverne Parker, I managed to get this contract inflation proofed, which was probably the biggest achievement I've ever made in this town hall, and somewhat ironic not as a councillor. And the reason why it's important is that there was a whole load of other organisations on the estate that were financially fragile because the grant had stayed the same and it was being eaten into by inflation. And I was determined that this wouldn't happen to the IAG contract. And initially I was told there was no chance. And I said, well, just ask the question. And then I was told, oh, we'd have to inflation proof every other project. And lo and behold, I said, well, why not? And lo and behold, every other project was inflation proofed as well.
Thank you very much.
I think that part of the problem was that they didn't do the correct level of consultation. They consulted providers as opposed to service users. I think now and considering the Localism Act, this is the time when, you know, you should be engaging with local residents and local people.
Thank you. So I think this raises quite a lot of connected but separate issues, which I think we have represented in various ways on the work programme already. I think the information, advice and guidance, following from your question, Joanna, perhaps we need to also be including under that we are looking at what has happened to get us to this point, so that it does not happen again in future. In that case, I think
that's actually future proofing, i.e. processes for future letting of contracts, because I don't think you can undo them. So it's lessons learned.
It is lessons. It absolutely is lessons learned, and particularly in terms of how the council's practices and processes are fitting in with the aspirations that they have, especially in terms of the learning that we've heard about, for instance, at leadership last night, and the recommendations from the external scrutiny team. So I think that everything that you have raised comes under already on our work programme. I thank you both very much for coming, and I think there are further questions I would like to ask, in specifically in relation to World's End project. And then perhaps I will report back to the committee with whatever answers I receive on that, with a view to going forward.
Could I just suggest ahead of, because this paper has to go to OSC tomorrow with our work programme, I would suggest through you, Chair, under D2, that you add and lessons learned for future contract letting.
Yes.
Thank you. Or future letting of contracts, yes.
So the other addition to what's on our page before us, how is Hazelwood and Adair Towers, which I think will be a paper.
What specifically is that going to cover?
That is going to be to hear from the residents the concerns around the quality, duration, timeline, completion of that project.
So is that the residents' conference evidence session?
I think I would expect there to be an evidence session, whether that is informally with the paper or whether we decide to make that a separate conference standalone.
Yeah, I mean, we can figure that out later. I just need to send
make sure that we've got the key themes that we're all agreed on, the key themes that we want to look at over the next year. Send to us tomorrow.
So it's going as under the pairs or under eight, sorry,
What is going under repairs?
it is and
It's a separate item.
so what is the baseline? So it's a review of the works,
Well, yeah, the work.
building works, capital projects, yeah, right.
Are we, Claire, going to have a paper on repairs at the Wells End estate?
That is the question as to whether we would have that as a separate item or whether that would be included under the repairs paper on item 7. What's your feeling?
I think it would need to be a separate item.
I agree.
And I think it may be, I mean, we've got to give it some time. I mean, so that something can be done. But I think it really needs to be a separate item. At some point.
So that will make our reports to the select committee potentially 8. So 9 with a Hazelwood and then. And we've got 9.
If we've got 5 meetings, but then are we also going to agree that we want an extra meeting for budget?
Yes, we are.
So we'll have 6. I would hope we can do that.
So meetings.
Oh yeah, so we'll have 5 from now.
But either way, the committee are, it seems, agreed that this should be a separate paper for the.
I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Otherwise we won't. We need to, it comes into a lot of other places, but we need to also focus
Bring it
on it.
together. Yeah. Any other thoughts and comments on what's before us as the work programme? So if we did include Hazelwood and Adair Towers and World's End,
Sorry, there's one thing,
yes,
we haven't expressly mentioned the hostels working group, so it's just to complete the work on it.
yes, that will be a report from.
There will be a report,
Yeah.
hopefully in
just September.
September.
It just probably has to be.
There'll have to be an agenda.
Yes,
item, won't
yeah,
it?
yeah.
Yeah.
It's in there somewhere,
Yeah, I think
It
it's
just
in the
says
work programme.
24, doesn't it? I think we need to bring it to conclusion. Really.
So in that case, are we agreed as a committee? Work programme,
Agreed.
and we are clear what we have for our note taking. Thank you very much, everybody, in that case. And we do know the meeting is now closed.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Also, old age, the election.